Welcome to another episode of Newer Tech People. Today we have Arjun Ramachandran he's the principal at elevenM, where today we're going to talk all things security. Welcome, Arjun.
Thanks, James. Good to be here.
I like a guy by the name of Trent McClanahan at NIB introduced me to you. I didn't know of you. You're obviously a really senior guy in the security space, and I think it'd be an interesting conversation to hear your perspective on a few things. But a lot of people in Newcastle might not know of who you are. Could you give us a bit of an overview of who you are and what you've been doing?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a principal at elevenM. We're a specialist cybersecurity and privacy consultancy. We work with large organizations, enterprises, startups, government agencies on privacy and security challenges. Everything from understanding what their kind of risks are through to coming up with strategies to meet those risks and implement those strategies. I have a sort of communications and a media background, so I look very specifically at strategic communications and culture and training and education when it comes to cybersecurity and privacy. As many people would know, it's a very complex technical area, so there's a lot that has to be done to kind of get people to understand what's going on, to kind of get workforces to know what their responsibilities are. So there's a lot that needs to happen in terms of culture and behavior, and that's kind of where I step in.
Nice. You mentioned that right there, and I think it's super important. Cyber and security as a whole, I think, strikes fear into a lot of people, and people think, it's very extremely technical. But our conversations pre-podcast, a lot of it's been around changing culture and changing the understanding and importance of cyber. You mentioned that that's a big part of your role. Is that the biggest challenge for a lot of organizations to buy into cyber and security as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big part of the challenge. There's a lot of work that goes into sort of, the discipline of it and understanding, the technicalities and the risks and the cyber threats, and then putting in the right technical controls. But what ends up happening is it's so, like, organizations today are so heavily dependent on data and technology right across the board. And so everyone in the organization really needs to sort of bring to the table some understanding of the risks around cybersecurity. So when you start talking about everyone at the organization, you're talking about culture. You're talking about, does everybody know that in their role they have they're on the hook, or they have a role to play? And so I think that is one of the biggest challenges, and it kind of goes all the way across the board. Like, depending on the organization, it's almost, you're sort of starting that culture conversation at the very top. Like, does the board and the C-suite actually have a mindset that where they recognize that security is important to their business? Do they know why? Is it because they've got a lot of valuable data about customers that they need to protect, or are they producing a lot of IP? Do they even get why it's important for their business? And then, are they then able to sort of talk to the organization about that and get everybody to understand their roles and responsibilities? So, culture is absolutely a really tough one. And I think, there's a real disconnect sometimes in sort of education and culture. You see sometimes this kind of urge to, let's just tell people what they need to know and what they should and shouldn't do, the do's and don'ts, and we'll educate them. But if you do that without a kind of working on the culture side of things, sometimes that disconnect can mean it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And, just as a sort of parallel, I was talking to a colleague of mine about the whole sort of the way COVID's playing out and the advice we're giving about masks and social distancing, and it's happening all around the world. But depending on the kind of culture of the country and the way the country works, the advice either falls flat or it doesn't. And I think there's a similar parallel in organizations. You need to sort of really get everyone understanding culture, and that comes down to sort of values and leadership and role modeling to get those very simple do's and don'ts to stick.
Yeah, there's that super popular book, Simon Sinek's Start With Why, right?
Yeah.
It's obviously not a security-orientated book whatsoever, but it's that understanding the why. And if people understand that why, then you can understand the what's, and then the what to do's, and why we're actually doing these other things. If they can understand why as a whole, it's the same as the COVID scenario. Like, why are we actually wearing masks as to, and you reverse engineer it back. So I think it's a very, very similar type of
Totally. I love that concept, the Start With Why concept, and I find myself using it all the time, even just as a way of communicating. It really, I think you have to treat people as adults. You need to sort of give them a bit of a sense of, you know, they will buy into this if you give them the information, if you explain why it's important. And so from a security perspective, you know, going back to the why often comes down to saying, well, what are we in this for? Why do we exist as a kind of company or a business, and what are we trying to achieve? And you can often draw the line from the security advice you want to give through to, well, it's because we want to serve our customers well in this way. So, you know, if we want to, let's say, be a business that is very sort of responsive to what customers need, if that's our why, we want to be really customer focused, or we want to, you know, use information that they give us to be really targeted and personalized in the information that we give them, in the services that we give them. But then that means we have a responsibility to protect that information, or we need to sort of think about what they want in terms of privacy. And so then you draw back to, then now you're in the space of sort of privacy and security. So you can kind of draw that line back to like the mission of the business.
Yeah.
And like that's something that I think is really important. You know, people can hear only so many times, don't click on that email, and it starts to sort of just become a background noise. But if they understand that context, and they understand why security matters more broadly because of the business strategy, they're going to pay closer attention to it.
Yeah, nice. I might get to that next step in a question. But for a lot of your, I guess, engagements, are companies buying into security from a proactive or more of a reactive perspective? Is that more so the case? Hey, we've had a data breach, or we've read about one of our competitors or somebody in our industry that's had a data breach or something really go wrong, and we've got to, you know, and it's acknowledgement, more reactive. Or are you seeing more companies investing in security from a proactive perspective, thinking, hey, we are a customer-orientated company, we're collecting more data, we've got to be on the front foot about this?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's a shifting landscape. I would say, you know, let's say 5 years ago, there was a certain set of companies or parts of the industry that were starting to be a bit proactive about it. They could kind of see the writing on the wall. Like, you know, our whole business is now being geared towards technology and data. And more than that, actually, like, is sort of almost premised on the idea that customers will trust us with this information. But have we really thought about what does it mean to have that trust and to preserve that trust? Well, we need to think about security. We need to think about privacy, and kind of let's get ahead of that. For the most part, I think a lot of businesses are probably still sort of playing a little bit of catch up and a bit reactive. And it can actually be both. Like, what can often happen is they'll be proactive enough to go, I'm starting to read and hear about security and privacy. Let me be proactive and start to understand what I need to do. And they'll kind of, you know, we'll often hear from them, and they'll, you know, we'll sort of help them kind of start to think about the problem. And then we won't hear from them for a while. They'll sort of go away with that, and the sort of the impetus to act on it won't really be there until they have an incident or a near miss, and then they'll come back and go, now let's really start to put this in place. But I think it's changing just because, you know, the volume of kind of headlines around breaches is happening a lot. The regulatory side is also a big driver. So there's, you know, both on the privacy and security side, there's a lot more sort of, you know, government regulation and focus from, you know, different agencies that are starting to mean that there's just almost no choice. You've got to take it seriously. And then, you know, you only have to sort of, like I said, pick up the papers and you hear about, you know, a CEO who's had to fall on his sword because of an incident, you know, major fines. All of these kind of things are just starting to get people to sort of act on it a bit more. The question is kind of what do they do with that desire to act? You know, how far do they want to take it?
Oh, on that then, you've worked with companies both on a technical level, hey, we're going to fix X, Y, Z, but also where your role more comes into it is building that culture of, you know, security acknowledgement. Where do you start with a company when, you know, you want to go in and start those conversations on changing the company culture around security? How does that conversation, how does that process begin?
So I think, you know, your point earlier is a really strong one around start with why.
Yeah.
So I think it's hard to have a conversation around culture unless you can kind of anchor it in what's the purpose of the business. So that's always a good sort of framing point. I think the way I think about culture is, you know, culture is kind of a set of shared values. and that behavior that reflects that you are aligned to those shared values. So you don't want to necessarily go in and reinvent the wheel. A lot of companies have a set of values already, and they have a culture already. You don't want to position it as, well, you've got your culture, and then now we're going to come in with this new thing called a security culture. What you want to do is embed security into an existing culture. So you start with values, you start to understand what the company's values are, what they're trying to do anyway, and then look for ways to express good security behaviors through those existing values. So they might be just as simple as, like there might be a value that's very much around sort of, let's say, doing the best for our customers, and you sort of start to understand, well, what does that mean in security terms? Let's express that.
Yeah.
So that's one place, is to start with the existing values. I really think it's important to engage leadership. I think culture is often a product of, culture is, really about sort of internalizing certain behaviors and norms, and often that is done because you see them role modeled. So if you see other people in your organization doing something, and you see leaders doing something, you internalize that as, well, that's just the way we need to be. So when I talk to organizations about culture, I often say, well, you need to let's get the CEO engaged in this. Let's get him or her saying, here's what matters to us from a security perspective. Here's why security matters for us. I don't think it's possible to really drive culture unless you have strong role models and strong leadership. So that's the other piece. And I think, keeping things pretty simple from a culture perspective as well. You're going to have, it's a very complex domain, and you're going to end up saying very kind of technical and complex things. Don't click on that. Don't do this. Use that cloud storage service. Don't use that one. It's going to get into the weeds. But when you want to talk about culture, you want to keep the messages very simple and high level, and then those other things will sort of all fall in within that.
Yeah, nice. I completely agree. I think it can't all be top down. It can't be all bottom up, right? It's trying to influence it both directions.
Exactly.
And you mentioned a couple of points just there about technology skills and things like that. I'd like to get into that from your perspective. But if we wind it back for you, where did you start, and how did that journey lead you into this security space? Because I know it's definitely not traditional.
Yeah, I've had a very sort of roundabout wanderer's journey into tech generally, and cyber. Bit of a double dip. I sort of came out of uni and went into technology. I did an undergraduate sort of business information technology degree, and went straight into a technology role within a sort of Big Four consulting company. And my first go at technology probably wasn't a good one. Like, I didn't actually enjoy it so much. I kind of came in, it was sort of after, some years after Y2K and all these kind of GST changes. There was a lot of money floating around in consulting. I went in and I was doing a fairly kind of typical Big Four consulting job of, implementing big enterprise packages at big companies. And there was a lot of fun from the excess that was floating around from all those big cashed up projects like Y2K. And so I was enjoying that part of it. But after a few years, realized I don't actually dig the actual job that I'm doing. And I always had this kind of passion for journalism and the news and whatnot. And so after a few years, I thought, let's just go after that. And so I literally sort of put a line through the technology career and went off and did a journalism degree. Learned very quickly that a degree in journalism doesn't actually help a great deal to get to where I wanted to get in journalism, which is to write for a newspaper. You need a portfolio. So went kind of right at the bottom rung of media, and just worked my way up writing for small publications, Packaging Magazine and these kind of things, just to build up a portfolio, and found my way eventually up into the Sydney Morning Herald. And so I worked as a journalist for a number of years. And I remember even while I was there, sort of because I had a technology background and a degree, that often kind of looked to me to write on tech stories, and I'd sort of push back on it. I had this thing about I don't want to be boxed in that way. I was running away from tech for a long time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was really sharpening up my kind of writing skills and research skills. and went from media into a media advisor role for a government minister, state government minister and deputy premier at the time. And that just, again, broadened out my comms skills from sort of being being able to write a news story to this kind of more strategic kind of approach where, in government, there's just so many different elements you've got to try and get in the one message. Like you might literally provide like 5 paragraphs to a newspaper, but you've got to sort of come up with the kind of political considerations, try to make sure there's something that puts the public at ease. So I got good at sort of thinking quite strategically about words and then went back into tech on the back of that, but as a comms person. And when I went back in that second time, I found that I was in love with tech again. Like I think the timing was interesting because it was, the smartphone had just come out. Well, smartphone penetration was just starting to pop up and cloud computing was sort of taking off and social media was happening. And all of a sudden it just felt like everything was changing and, the society was being transformed through technology. The way we were interacting with each other was changing. Industries were being kind of disrupted, including the ones that I had just come out of, like media was having a real hard time of things.
Yeah.
So I was just seeing this kind of massive shift in the world, and suddenly it's exciting to me again. And I felt like I also had a role to play with my comms background. I was working for one of the banks at the time, CBA, and they had a very strong CIO who had a very big vision for what technology was and what it could be from the bank's perspective. And he wanted help telling that story. And, I just found myself really fortunately in this place where all of these trends were happening. I had this skill set to help positively tell the story about why the bank wants to invest in technology, what it wants to do. And that was kind of both an internal and an external focus. It was sort of, do a bit of rah-rah and get people within the organization excited, but also externally, getting customers, investors to understand why the bank was putting so much into technology. And, while it was trying to also unpick all these legacy systems and glitches and all that happening, kind of put that in context and say, well, this is part of the pain we're going through because we're going to get to a better world through tech. And so I got really energized by that. And again, like I said, saw that I had a role to play to actually sort of help move that mission and that strategy forward. And so I was doing that sort of generally in the sort of tech space within the banking sector for a while, and then started to hone in on this idea of security and privacy. And that was kind of mainly because I was just seeing that a lot of the plays were starting to involve data, and there was this real kind of question of like trust underpinning what organizations wanted to do. They want to collect a lot of information, they want to deliver better services, but at the end of the day, they're going to need to get this kind of security and privacy thing right to really underpin that. And Edward Snowden happened like literally at this time as well. He came in and launched this dossier about what Facebook was doing, and so that kind of blew it up again. And so I just sort of really suddenly found myself in this space where I could kind of help do some advocacy within the organization and outside around trust, around privacy, around security. And so that's kind of how I just sort of landed in it. And I, like I said, was fortunate to kind of have a couple of, very charismatic leaders that could they had the seeds of the story and they wanted me to help them tell it. They wanted me to help them kind of promote it. And so that's sort of how I landed in those spaces. And then from there, it kind of grew.
It sounds a hell of a lot like just providing value, right? You were in a spot, you had a particular skill set that was able to provide that value at that point. And I think that a lot of things, as simple as it is, just being able to provide value goes a long way. Mate, that's a super interesting story. And I think there's probably a couple of parts there I'd like to pull apart. I think for technology professionals these days, the old school thoughts of, let's call it a software developers or IT people in general are, in a dark room banging away on a keyboard, right? That's changed, and it's just not the case anymore. Yeah, obviously there's still a place for extremely technical people, but that communication element that you've gone down has obviously led to a lot of success for you. I'm not saying all tech professionals need to go and do journalism degrees, but that ability to communicate, the ability to communicate value, the ability to talk with other people or provide your value, communicate that value proposition from a technology perspective, it's just a rising importance in the technology landscape or business landscape in general. Do you think you agree that, the journalism obviously provide you that opportunity? Is there any advice you give to other people without going to your lengths, but advice for others to help position themselves in that way or grow as better communicators?
Yeah, well, I think you've hit it on the head, which is, I think, you sort of start by sort of understand or recognize how important it is. I think, I've just seen in organizations, very skilled people in a particular domain, and technical can be a broad term in this sense. It can be someone who's kind of technical in the sense of they're a great coder, or they're very knowledgeable about a particular technology, or it could be they're a risk professional or something like that, and they know those frameworks really well. But being able to sort of express their value and advocate for their value, I think is a really important skill. I think there are so many kind of competing interests around technology. And so being able to sort of stand up for the value that your thing delivers is really important.
And competing interests on a business side, right? Like if a technology team's fighting for extra budget for more headcount or for another project or to invest in a particular platform, being able to communicate that value prop is massive, right?
Yeah. So I think, I totally agree. So I think, you can't, it's unrealistic, like you say, to expect everyone's going to sort of have a journalism background or whatever, but there are any number of sort of professional writing courses and things like that people can do to sharpen up that skill set. But the other thing I think is just to find, good allies within an organization as well who can help you tell that story. I've been lucky enough to be that ally for a lot of people who sort of, come to me and ask for, what ways that they can tell their story. But also I think there are within organizations people whose job it is to sort of surface up things that are of value, but you don't necessarily know what they are. So those people kind of can put themselves forward and say, here's what I'm doing. How do I get this into the briefing that we give to the CIO every month, or the report that goes up to the board? Like, this is a good piece of work that I'm doing. And so often those people that are pulling those reports together, I know in my experience when I've had to do those, you don't know all of what's going on. You don't know what great value is being delivered. And often when people come forward with it, it's like, great, that's
yeah, they help you out, right?
I need that. So, just, being quite open and transparent about what you're doing and why you think it matters.
Yeah, nice. Obviously that's attacking, your roles from a communication perspective. Now, the security side of it, has there been a sharp learning curve for you from learning the technical side of security, having that time out of technology and then back in? Has there been a sharp learning curve there? Massive
learning curve. I didn't know a great deal about security or privacy when I kind of got into it. It was, like I said, I was sort of pulled in purely on the basis of this kind of skill set I had around writing and research, but it wasn't because I had any subject matter expertise. So I had to learn it on the job, and that was really challenging. I think I was lucky in the sense of I had a profession that required me to always kind of go and chase down new things and research them in order to write about them, and so that was kind of my trade anyway. Yeah. But to get the level of depth I needed to actually be effective was challenging.
How'd you go about that?
Yeah, so it was, a lot of conversations. People have told me often that I'm not afraid to ask dumb questions, silly questions, and I think, I've never been. I was not initially conscious of it that was something I did, but I think that helps. Is like I'll often say, well, what does that mean? Or I'll be the one to sort of ask the sort of, can we go back 2 steps? And so that kind of approach, I think, helps. Just going to a lot of, conferences and meetups and things where you can kind of just hear people talking and learn from that. So professional networking is incredibly important. And then, just consuming as much information and news as I could. So I'd ask the pen tester or the security architect, what do you read? they'd give me a couple of things, and I'd kind of add them to my news sources and start just reading and consuming.
I'd love the ability to ask dumb questions. Same thing for myself, right? Obviously, recruitment across the technology space, I have to have a solid level of knowledge across the board. So more deep in some parts than others, but technology is changing extremely quickly, and I don't think anyone acknowledges, or I don't think anyone expects a recruiter to know that. I don't need to be able to write the code to build the application, but I need to know, how it's done and what languages and the differences between A and B. And it's the ability to ask, or just even the fact that you will ask it and not be embarrassed to ask the dumb questions. I think most people actually respect you for acknowledging that you don't know the answer and asking the question, rather than sitting there and pretending to know what it is and then being caught out at some point in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good insight, because I think that experience is also more common than maybe people think. Like, you probably feel reluctant to ask the dumb question, or that you feel a bit reserved about the fact that you don't know something. But the reality is, a lot of people are learning. Like you say, these are fast changing areas, and there's a new thing on the block every year, and people don't know what it is, and it's okay not to know what it is, and it's important to know that you have an attitude to learn about it. And if I sort of talk about security as well, it's full of people might not necessarily have my background, but it's full of like wanderers and people who've gone on weird journeys to get there. Like, there's obviously a pathway that kind of is maybe not standard, but maybe more common if people kind of go through, let's say, a computing science degree, do some security electives, and then kind of come in. But it's full of people that have, worked in different areas of technology or different areas of business and kind of found themselves there. It is very much a sort of broad church kind of thing. And so I have found that it's quite common to find that, any given person probably only understands 20% really well of what the security team is doing. And there's this whole 80% that they need to ask a lot of questions about and learn. And that, no matter where you are, you're going to have your own 20-80 split, but it's going to be roughly that. And so, and again, you kind of go all the way up to the most senior people in the company. A lot of them they're just starting to grapple with what security means, and, what are the different elements and how do we tackle this problem. So there's education and learning and openness required at every level of the stack. And unfortunately, or hopefully, that's kind of where I kind of see that there has been a role for me, is to sort of try to help that. Even though I don't have the answers, I can maybe have the skill set to help.
Yeah. Mate, I just think that not being embarrassed about asking those questions and acknowledging that, there is 80% out there that you don't know, or you don't know at that same depth. And people, most of the time, you will find people are very happy to share, especially if it's in their 20% wheelhouse, because, hey, when it comes up and they get the opportunity to share, their in-depth knowledge, most people will jump at that opportunity, right?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Mate, you mentioned securities, the skills and the technologies are changing so quickly, as you said, every year, and that's probably even, that's probably at best, right? Things changing so frequently. Building security teams is obviously extremely challenging. What's your sort of state of the world when it comes to building security skills within a team or within an organization, or building that as a talent pool in general?
Yeah, it's a really tough space. I know that most businesses, most organizations still struggle to find good security talent. There's a real shortage. I think last week the Australian government put out its cyber strategy and said there's still like 17,000 shortage of cyber skills, and there will be for the next kind of 5 years or so. It's been a well identified thing, and I think at the kind of coalface, companies are struggling with it. They still sort of really struggle to fill the pool.
How do we build that pipeline? I think you've had some experience in around that space in the past.
Yeah.
I'm providing advice around that. I'd be interested to hear your take.
Yeah, so in one of my previous roles, we sort of looked at, well, this is a problem. It's not going away, and it's not going to organically get any better in the time frame we need it to. You know, we're all like ramping up our kind of data collection and all that, and we need to solve this. So what can we do? And so one of my roles was to sort of look at a strategy at building out that talent pipeline. The first thing to sort of understand is it really has to be like a full pipeline kind of approach. So we've seen, fortunately, I think in the last 5 years, a lot of investment now from governments to sort of increase the number of courses, for example, at universities. And that's been really good. So you're starting to get more courses that teach cybersecurity, but you kind of want to get the pipeline flowing at all ends. You need kind of kids at school knowing that it's even a career. Like that, it's funny how low the awareness is that cybersecurity is actually a career path. Like that, if you like breaking things and from a technical perspective, going in and doing that you could actually do the same thing as a job. It's not a hobby that you need to leave behind. So, building out the pipeline so that kids are interested, understand it's a career, doing the right subjects at high school, getting themselves into a degree that has, security options and then flowing through is like a full pipeline-wide approach that needs to happen. And I think that is still an ongoing project. There's a bit of a challenge, I think, now, which is that there's been a lot of focus on, university courses, and we need more of them. And so there's been a lot of investment in standing up of the courses. There's also a teachers pipeline issue. So you need to have kind of enough people that are skilled to teach cybersecurity skills. So that's kind of a slightly different twist on it that actually wouldn't undersell how important that is to the pipeline. Like you need to have high quality teachers to get the high quality pipeline of talent.
Yeah.
And so that's a tricky one as well. Very
difficult when that skill set hasn't been around so long to have those experienced people to be able to teach.
Yeah, and like this was one of the things we sort of stared into when we started, which was, we were starting to kind of see some of these courses produce really high quality graduates. But often they weren't even getting to the point that they were being graduates. Like they'd be in their second year and they'd do a couple of, let's say, competitions or something, and they'd get on the radar of Google or someone in the valley. And they would say to the student, "Don't worry about finishing your course. We've got a job for you."
Yeah.
And so there was this kind of leakage of high quality talent. And the reason I say that in the context of teachers is it would be awesome if you could keep those students in the university space, completing their degree, but then also maybe teaching, doing some tutorials.
Yeah.
Like you're losing all these kind of great graduates, and that also means you're losing a potential pool of teachers. So kind of trying to think clever about ways to keep, that talent in the Australian ecosystem and then in the kind of academic ecosystem so that they can kind of teach back is important. Obviously, industry academia partnerships are really important. So getting exposure, both just in terms of making sure the curriculum is kind of practical and relevant, but also getting that kind of exposure of, industry professionals who are actually working in security or privacy, coming back into academia, teaching. That'll help kind of grow the pipeline. But it also goes back to that kind of that role model thing. It's like you can see what a career looks like when you have someone come and stand. So some of that is really sort of been picking up over the last few years, those kind of partnerships and that academia. I think the other spin on it is kind of diversity is still a challenge as well. Really getting, like particularly sort of gender diversity in security is an ongoing challenge. And so that's where I think that early pipeline stuff is important because a lot of, I think the research is something like a lot of girls drop out of STEM subjects by about year 10. Like that's kind of where it tends to happen. So creating the role models, showing, surfacing the role models and showing them into high schools is really important to keep diversity flowing through. But then and I think the other piece is also like, because we've talked already about how, security is a broader church now, there's obviously sort of technical roles and there's a kind of pipeline that gets you there, but a security team is comprised of so many different skill sets. And so the other way to think about the pipeline is, can we embed security knowledge and baseline kind of concepts into other courses? Can we get it into into law? Can we get it into communications? Can we get it into the business schools? Exactly. So that you could because, as we said, like there's, like now security teams have got, they've got like, incident responders and penetration testers and whatnot, but then they've also got, very business focused program managers, or they've got, a risk professional or someone who will really value and make use of a foundational set of security knowledge that they can bring to bear on an organization. So, how do you get it into all of those other courses and just lift up the baseline knowledge? I think that's the next maybe thing that we really need to look at.
Yeah, I think that's sort of that mentorship you made mention of. You didn't use the actual word mentor, but from a university perspective, keeping people in the system, and then that person provides that mentorship or at least the clear path to where you can go. It's the same within organizations as a whole. If you can hire somebody at a sort of senior level and then grow the people up, or bring a consulting agency in that's got some really strong knowledge and then have a junior grow up, or some people from other parts of the business grow and become those internal advocates, is a nice way to look at it, as opposed to just trying to hire a bunch of experienced people, which is extremely difficult because of the lack of talent. So it's having that senior person or that mentorship, or the agency or the consulting firm come in, be able to provide that mentorship, that guidance, and then have other people, either junior people who want to become a security professional, or other parts of the business, come in and take that sort of that mentorship, that leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always more satisfying, to also say like probably cost effective to grow your own people, but yeah, it's much more satisfying. So yeah, thinking about it in terms of mentorship is critical. And I think some of those industry partnerships I mentioned really kind of thrive off doing that. There are lots of sort of programs where different organizations have gotten together and said, let's like try and profile the different roles that exist in cybersecurity, and we'll have one person do like a day in the life kind of video series or something to really, make that real, and then create maybe a personal connection, a mentorship arrangement. I think those things are useful. And then, like you say, within an organization, like it's a really good way to do it.
Nice. Mate, one of the questions I ask on this podcast every time is in around that education space. You've done yourself 2 degrees, and one from technology to begin with, and then back into journalism. Then you mentioned again the universities would, bring up cyber professionals as the next pipeline. Obviously, it sounds like you've got a really positive take on your experiences with university.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my like you said, I've done 2 degrees, so I've not shy of a university experience. I think from what I've seen, also personally in working on sort of the skills challenge, there's some really really passionate people about creating kind of the next generation of security professionals, and that means they're not wanting to create something that's theoretical and outdated the second the students leave university. They want it to be highly applied and designed by industry. And so some of those experiences have made me really hopeful for the quality of education that's out there at the moment. And then it's also sort of expanding into other sectors, like the TAFE sector's got a lot of great courses now. So there's a lot of opportunities to sort of find your path. And then, the professional certifications, that's a whole other thing as well. There's a lot of ways, I think, for people to kind of get that, formal. I didn't do it. I sort of, like I said, learned it on the job, but I've always kind of looked at it and gone, that's probably a good thing to sort of have.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it's part of the mix there, right? There's multiple options you can pick from. And I think that my gut feel at the moment, my personal take is it'll forever be a part of the mix, that it just might not exist in the current format where it's, that longer term degree. I think you'll pull, different parts of it and look at micro degrees and things like that, which might say, extremely relevant with the current market. And you can pull in something from TAFE or a professional, from a professional, service or somebody from within the industry who's providing certifications, things like that might, come together as your education whole.
Yeah. And the other thing I've, found really exciting from looking at the way the security world works as well is the amount of sort of informal education and play type stuff there is. So you got like all your projects and things that you can do, like kind of, let's say, hacking groups and things like that kind of come together, and they have different competitions and things like that, or people sort of develop their own little projects on and put them up onto GitHub and things like that. And increasingly the ability for like a candidate to say, well, okay, here's my degree and here's what I've done, but also check out my GitHub, go have a look. And for that to be actually almost like the difference that gets them the job, and so
you're speaking to my heart. I love that. I think in the tech space in particular, somebody that shows an interest outside of what they do day to day in their 9 to 5, or what they've done outside their degree. Hey, I've done a degree, but I've also built XYZ. I've participated in XYZ hackathon. I've done this challenge. Or if you're, maybe you've built your own application, your own website, things like that. The differentiator, I believe, in helping you stand out.
Well, and, for me, it's a nice parallel for me or back to my experiences in journalism as well, because I thought, I'll do this degree and I'll do my best in the degree and I'll do all the kind of assessments as well as I can, and that's going to get me somewhere.
Yeah.
And then they were saying, well, show us what you've done. Like, show us what you've written. Show us, what articles or columns have you just done yourself and submitted off to a publication that we can sort of look at and see what you've been doing, to actually see, how you apply the skills that you're learning.
Yeah, like blogs, for example, for journalism, having your own blog that you've actually put something out there.
So writing samples is like the equivalent, I guess, of your GitHub.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it was what mattered. So it's been cool to see that is totally the way it works. Also, in many of these, particularly in some of these more technical roles, it's like, some of these, students that come out of universities have got amazing portfolios of stuff that they do in their own time.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Yeah.
Completely agree. We're getting on. We'll sort of start to wrap it up in a minute. So just to go into a little bit about yourself, obviously a pretty big role. We work with, a number of different companies and things like that. Competing priorities, I imagine. How do you manage your day from a productivity perspective?
It's an ongoing challenge, I think. I have fairly kind of, I work with a sort of variety of clients, so I tried to sort of have fairly, fixed days where I'm kind of focused on, one particular client, and I can kind of give myself to them. But from a productivity perspective, I think the challenge for me, particularly in the world of COVID, is getting the balance, so not just sort of disappearing into, like the home office and just kind of working through things. I think productivity comes from being able to still have those key breaks, those key moments where you can kind of disconnect and pull back, because particularly sort of a lot of some of what I do, I think I feel like I need thinking space. And one of the challenges I find is that the home working environment doesn't always lend itself to thinking space. Like you don't have a commute, you don't have a walk like 2 minutes down to go to the bathroom or to the kitchen. It's like everything is sort of nearby, so you tend to sort of become a bit bunkered down, and that can mean that you become less productive because you're not sort of thinking through problems in a broader way. And so for me, that's probably been one of the key challenges of late. Other than that, it's, I'm a big advocate for like, what are the 3 things you can realistically get done today sort of approach. Nice. So it's kind of, you've got 12 things that you could do, but you probably won't do any of them if you try to do all of them.
Yeah.
So I'm like, the first thing I'll do in a day is write like, these are the 3 that I need to get done.
Check them off at the end of the day. It's a successful day.
Yeah. And I'll keep going back to them. But that's a challenge because things change during a day, but that's my sort of overall mindset.
Yeah, very nice. I've used a similar app myself in the past, and I haven't stuck to it. I don't think I've never stuck to a lot of those apps. I've tried a lot of them, but I would say that's probably one of the stronger ones. And I try to, keep roughly to something similar where, hey, what's my at least one really big win for the day, or a couple of wins for the day, and then you get them and things come up, right? Emails, always somebody else's agenda. So if you're just at the mercy of your email the whole day, you can have many unproductive days.
Yeah, and the work from home thing again, things are a little bit more rigid as well. Like what used to be maybe a 5-minute conversation, chat to your colleague or pick up the phone. Everything now seems to be like, let's make that a Zoom call or a Teams call, book in 30 minutes for that. And so there's kind of this like the liquidity of like information exchange between people is kind of broken down a little bit, and that can make things harder as well. So trying to just, try to keep it simple. Yeah,
I agree. Mate, you mentioned before, part of your learning was taking some advice. Somebody mentioned a good book here. Someone mentioned, something here where you can learn from. Are there any books or podcasts that you've consumed in your days that you think, hey, this is something I'd love to recommend to people? This is one, it can be security related, it could be life related, anything related.
One of the podcasts I've always, for anyone in tech that I would recommend it's called Exponent. And it's run by an American technology strategist and his kind of co-host is actually an Aussie guy who's based in the States, and they talk about kind of technology strategy. And so, they really kind of break down what a business is, like a Facebook or whatever, are really trying to do and how their whole business model works and all of that. And it was one of the ones that really sort of got me quite excited in that sort of second wave I had with tech. It's sort of like, the world is changing, and there's this kind of social business connection going on powered by tech. So I really recommend that one. And as a book, there's a book I like called Factfulness, and it's just a book about, like how we sometimes miss the truth of what's going on. There's so much information. And so this book is kind of like, actually the world's not not going to hell. There's actually a lot of good indicators. We're making progress. And here's how you should think about the world to see that. And I always find that kind of thinking is useful because there's so much information. How do you make sense of any of it? And, it kind of ties into what I try to do in my job as well, which is like, let's kind of get to the why to your question.
Nice. Is there anyone out there that people should follow for some more information? Obviously, that podcast you mentioned. Is there anyone else that you think, whether it be Twitter or anything else, or blogs that you think, hey, somebody should definitely follow this person?
Probably more for more on the technical side, but, the Risky Business podcast guys do a great job on the security front. That's probably a good roundup. And what else is there? Yeah, I like... there's one from out of the States called Morning Cybersecurity. It's by the Politico magazine, and they kind of do a nice roundup. So, there's probably a couple there.
Nice, mate. Nice. You're based in Newcastle, mate. If people like what they hear today and they're like, oh, I've got a question about security, or I've got a question about, building a security culture or having those conversations, what's the easiest way for people to get a hold of you?
So they can get me on Twitter. So Arjun Rama is my handle, and also on LinkedIn. Probably the best two.
We'll link up both of those in the show notes on the website. So, mate, thank you for your time today.
Cool. Thanks, James.
Cheers.
Cheers.